Okay. Hi, everyone. Today is Friday. You know what day it is. I'm interviewing another wonderful human being for You Need to Hear This, and you really do need to hear this. Amber Sessoms is going to be joining us. Dr. Amber Sessoms will be joining us soon. So give me a sec. As soon as she gets on, we'll get started. There she is. And her handle is natural_inclination. So you've got to give her a follow when this is over.
I've never done this for this format, so I'm like, what do I do?
I'm sorry, I should have probably told you.
It's
I
fine.
just assume that everyone spends their entire life on Instagram. Hi. I cannot believe this is actually happening.
I know,
right
right?
now. Like, what people don't know is, like, we have had we've had a relationship for a few years now,
Right.
and never actually met. And like, this is crazy. We met on the internet. We met on Instagram, and it's like I don't know even how, but we followed each other. And
Michelle Obama.
oh, okay,
I was on her page and I saw you, and I was like, let me see what she's about. And then I'm like, I love her. She's amazing.
Which is so kind, because you are like a cornerstone in our family. Like, so my husband is obsessed with black hair care, and my husband is a white man. And so I think it stems from this fear of, I will not have anyone tell me I'm doing my girl wrong. And so
I love that.
he is obsessed. He watches, I mean, anybody in the natural hair care world, he would know their names before I would. It's crazy. And he watches YouTube videos constantly and reads constantly. So you have been like his source of information. You've taught him so much. Like, he defers to you over me. And and he's always like, hey, go ask Amber that. Hey, could you ask Amber this for me? I mean, he's read everything that you've written. I'm pretty sure he's read your dissertation. So anyways,
I love him.
we are obsessed with you in our family. So yes.
That's awesome. Thank you for that.
Thank you for being here. I'm so happy to see you, and you're glowing and just looking.
Oh,
just
I washed my hair for you. It's still wet, so
Hey.
it turns into this mop. Like, usually by day 2 or 3, I like it because it gets fuller.
Yeah.
So I'm still struggling with it just sitting on my
Yeah.
head. But
Yeah. Well, that's like love. When you say that, I wash my hair for you, I'm like, ooh,
that's
girl,
serious.
love.
Yes, and I got, a whole process, the clay and all the apple cider vinegar. So I did all the steps.
Yep, I'm about to do that today. I'm like, this is my self-care. Washing my hair is loving myself, doing all the apple cider vinegar. I'm gonna do a little avocado mask, and
Ooh.
we're getting serious. So there's so much that I want to ask you, but I want to check in. And how are you doing in this pandemic? I don't know, nightmare we're living in. How are you?
I don't know. Like, I struggle with, I keep saying I'm going through these cycles of grief, and I just keep going around and around and around, which is so exhausting. So I go between rage because of now the civil unrest, and now people like this awakening about that racism is a thing. And then just being trapped in the house. So I have a 17-year-old, an 11, and a 5-year-old. And the 5-year-old in COVID, and you could probably relate, it doesn't mix. Like, it's not a good mix.
Yes.
It's not. So that's struggle. So my husband went out to mow the lawn, and he came out and said, you have to keep her quiet. So she's upstairs right now. But that's been a struggle, seeing how it's impacted my family. My husband's working from home. I'm working from home. So that's been a struggle, trying to adjust and seeing how it's impacted my kids, as far as like my 11-year-old wants to isolate herself now. And it's like you have to push them to get outside. They don't always want to go outside, but they need the vitamin D and all these things. So getting out and being active seems like it's been more of a fight to get them to go out now. Which is kind of troubling.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, because it's for the first couple months, it was like, okay, this is kind of like summer break early. We do summer, and every summer it's challenging to figure out what we're gonna do. But then now summer happened, and so it's like double the length of time. Like new habits are being formed.
Mhm.
And I feel like, you know, I've talked to people the last few Fridays about screen time and kids and the mom guilt. But like the lethargy, the lethargy that we all feel, and like I'm seeing my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old, and like it's not a surprise when people are saying, I'm feeling depressed. I feel really depressed, or I feel really ill. Like it makes sense because we're not getting out. Where are you going to go? Like, and even if, you know, I've got neighbors here who do go out and they do live like this is not even a thing that's happening.
Living their best life.
There are people living in their best. I don't know how, but they are. And I'm thinking, like, where are you going that's satisfying? I think that the part that, even if I could go wherever I wanted, let's say I want to go to the mall, there's no satisfaction in it because life hasn't returned. It's like there's that pace of life is not the same. So even if I go to that isolated place, there's no joy there for. Like I'm realizing that so much of joy I find is in just that rhythm of life and everyone kind of in it, that forward motion. And it's really strange that nobody has that. And at this point, it feels like a thing that's so politicized that I'm like, I don't even know where to go with it. Like masks for a political statement? What?
It's oppression. Like you're equating it to oppression. That's really fascinating to me.
And I can't, we won't go there today.
Yeah.
Because I'm feeling it turning red.
Right.
The things that the deep dive I made a mistake doing this week was reading different individuals' social media about the oppression of masks. And I'm like, oh, Lord Jesus, you need to please help me. It's hard. So yes. So you're doing okay. We're doing okay.
I'm doing okay.
And,
I have a moment.
Yeah, you have your moments. But I'm really glad you said like cycles of grief. Like that is a real thing. And the fact that like one day you're here, I just keep thinking of like a wheel, like here I'm moving, and then sometimes I roll back. Like I feel like I'm gonna get to acceptance. Nope, I'm back at anchor. So yes. So
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Oh no, you're not. So let me give everyone some context about who this genius that I'm looking at is. Amber Sessoms, is that how you say your last name?
Yes.
Sessoms. So Dr. Amber Sessoms so you are in Pennsylvania, and you got your you got your bachelor's in psychology and minored in African American studies.
Yes.
Then you got a master's in psychology, and then you got your doctorate at Penn, right?
Penn State.
Yes. And in education, doctorate of education, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lifelong learning and adult education. Yes.
Lifelong. Okay. So you're an educator currently you're a psychologist in a public school district in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And I think it's like the largest in Pennsylvania.
It's one of the largest. It's pretty, we have about over 1,800 kids in our building, about 160 staff. So it's one of the biggest. Philadelphia, I think, is the biggest.
Okay.
We have 19 buildings, but Philadelphia it's probably quadruple that.
Huge.
Yeah.
So then what is like the makeup of the school district? Is it very diverse? Is it homogeneous? What is it?
It is diverse, but it's racially segregated. So we have two different sides of the district. So I'm on the one side where it's predominantly white. Yeah. So about 73% white. And then the other part is almost the inverse of that. So it's more like they have apartment complexes over there. It's more the lower socioeconomic status. So all of that. They have more teachers of color over there. And it's just me up until last year. We got our first Black teacher since I've been there for 12 years. He's also the basketball coach. But yeah, so it is a challenge.
Sure.
And because I'm always the one, like I call it out when I see it and I name it. It's been interesting because I will call out someone's racist comments or anything like right off the bat. So I've been in that center of that for the last 12 years, disrupting that.
Yes.
It's exhausting.
And doing that work by yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Which we're going to come back to that. So I wanted to just brag on you a little bit that I know that you are an award-winning educator, that you have been given a couple of awards, and I'm going to get them wrong, but I know one was Educator of the Year. And then the other one, tell me about it.
It was the Community Responders Network, so it was their inaugural award for just being like looking at social justice within the schools and within the community. So it was really an honor to receive that, because we had a racist incident that happened, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago, that went viral. It was a social media post, and how we responded to it. I wanted to make sure I centered our student voices in that, and the response to that caught a lot of attention about how we destroyed the hate, is what we called it, and how we looked at how microaggressions, they're really macro, but how they impact people from different intersections of their identity. And they were speaking out about that and saying that we're not going to have that in our school. So that was been the work that we did, and it got attention from people.
That's so cool. And so I was going to say, yes. So that award was for student-led conversation on everyday microaggressions that reinforce differences. And then you did your doctoral research on not just natural hair, not like just the movement, but natural hair in like natural hair blogs and like the community around it. Is that correct?
Yes. And I think people look at it like you did research on just natural hair blogs, but it was really, if you look at it, like the critical race theory behind it, and putting that feminist perspective in there, and the sisterhood that can or cannot form from that. So can white people be in these spaces? How are they welcome? You know, how Black women can pit each other against each other. So colorism came into there, all these things like curlism, all these things came into play about, you know, well, your hair is a certain texture, or I define Blackness this way, and who makes up the term Blackness. If you have a broad nose, if you have all these things came into play, like as I was reading through, and I wanted to see if the women in the online spaces were actually being authentically who they were in offline. So that was really interesting. So I interviewed them, and then I went to their blog. So I can't remember the name of it now. It's been a couple of years, but there's a blog format where you can go and see what you write if you discuss. So I don't know if you've ever seen it, but you can see everything anyone's posted on any blog if you're a part of this this platform. So I got to go through and dissect, and it's been interesting. So I know there's 2 bloggers. One, like she was in California. She's on there, and she put her phone down because she's smoking cigarettes, but she's talking about her body as a temple, and I thought it was just hilarious. So she's sitting there smoking, and I'm like, I can't wait to see what she blogs about, because she's like, I am all about peace and, you know, sisterhood. And I go on there, and she is just ripping people a new ways. It was hilarious.
I mean, it's so funny, and you know, because you have this public space that you've created where you're putting yourself out there, you're putting your thoughts, your ideas, your family out there, and there's moments where you post something and you're like, you've got to check yourself, and you're like, am I being authentic? Am I placating to an audience? Am I just trying to create an image? Because you know as well as I do that everybody who has a like interior design, let's say Instagram feed, that one corner is right to the gods. The rest of the house is a hot mess. And so
that's how my house is right now.
Right. And so like you see that one thing and you're like, they are so together. That life looks like a dream. No, it's not. It's a nightmare. Please. She's screaming at her kids to get out of the way, to get that one shot so she can edit. I mean, it's so inauthentic and at the same time so authentic. It's such a weird space. So digital space would be such an interesting place to analyze. And like, I think the next step that you studied is the authenticity of like these people. Like, are they actually congruent to what they're saying they are? Oof.
Yeah.
That makes me nervous.
Right. But I'm glad that you have to do those self-checks. I have to do it with myself too. And what I post, and I'm like, am I being authentic? But not everyone does that, because we can create this persona or how we want to be perceived. Even in our day-to-day life, we wear a mask. And I'm so against that, like, especially being a Black woman and how we have to feel like we have to act a certain way to be respected or be seen. And I'm like, no, why can't I just be who I am in all spaces? And if you're uncomfortable with that, that's your issue.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So one of the reasons why I was up all night is I was so excited to chat with you and see your face. But then also there were so many, the problem here about interviewing you is that there are so many ways that I could go with this. I mean, and I could be doing this for 10 hours a day. Like, you really are brilliant. And you really are. And
I'm working better on receiving compliments. I'm working on that. That's something.
That's hard for all of us. I really admire I just admire you being as a thought leader. I admire the content that you put out. It's always, it really makes me think on a level that's so deep and so sometimes piercing, like really addressing the story that I've told myself. It gets me. So I wanted to, I mean, I have pages and pages of notes. And so I just like, I've got to focus. Oh, my husband joined. Oh, Dave, you missed it. I was just talking about how Amber rules in this house. Amber's rules are the only rules that matter. So I'm gonna try to stay on point because I just have so much. But okay, I want to know a little bit about your background and how you arrived at this work.
Yeah, so I'm from Middletown, Pennsylvania. So if you've ever heard 3 Mile Island, I don't know. So people our age, I'll be 40 next year. And I know you just turned 40, right?
Yeah.
They're around the same age, but I notice people when I say it to younger people, they think I'm saying too much information. But it's 3 Mile Island, the nuclear power plant that almost, exploded. And so that's the area I'm from. It is very homogeneous, but everyone pretty much in that area that was Black was my cousin. Like I'm not even exact. I am serious about that. So it has since changed, but so I'm growing up there. I graduate. I'm the only Black female. My biracial cousin graduated, and then there was one Black male in my class of like about 160. And just growing up, I'm raised by my grandmother who presents as white in most spaces. People think she's white. She's Mexican and Black. But she had straight hair. So I had a lot of issues growing up with colorism and feeling like I was not beautiful. My uncle used to call me Black Amber and tease me. So I would never go outside in the summer. I would only go outside and play in the winter because I just felt so ugly and not cared for, because a lot of people in my immediate family were much lighter than me. They had different hair than me. So I just felt like I wasn't worthy. And then with my mom abandoning me, that just created a whole nother issue. So all that comes into play about who I am and where do I belong, and being the trope and being the stereotype of, Blackness and speaking on behalf of everyone. But then going to college was my first time I ever had a Black educator that I actually saw myself. And it was my late mentor, Dr. Rita Smith-Waddell from Millersville University. And she was just authentically who she was. Like, she did not care. Like, she was who she was in all spaces. She spoke her truth. And I'm like, yes, that is what I want to be. Like, I don't have time to be playing these games and wearing this mask for people. So she really helped me to develop into who I was as a person. And then from there, like, I remember my freshman year, I shaved my head and I went natural because I was a track runner and I couldn't do with the relaxing. My hair was breaking out. And the freedom that I had in that and just being who I am. And I was one of the first people at that time. So that was 2000. That went natural. That wasn't a thing back then,
No. Were you relaxing previously?
Yes. And I had like a short Halle Berry cut. So I was all cute, and I'm like, this is not working. My hair is breaking out. My hair was just breaking off because I was having to wash it so much. So I just went to my hairdresser and she shaved it. And it was that moment where you're like, what is it going to look like? Because you don't know, because you're so used to manipulating your hair.
Yes.
Am I going to have a curl? Like, I don't know what this is going to look like, but it was so freeing. And then being the only one on campus, I know there was one other friend that did go natural because of that, but I was the only one. So people thought that I had to be a lesbian because I'm this track runner. I'm like buff. So clearly I can't be. So then it plays into your femininity. And I'm like, who makes these rules?
Right.
So I'm all about these dichotomies in these roles. So through the work that I did in school, I'm like, these dichotomies, these roles, like who creates them?
Yeah.
And I remember being in class for my doctoral program. And I went to class one day because I was so upset that someone said something to me so racist at school and they didn't even realize it. They were saying how, Emma, don't worry about Black people. Just keep living in your white neighborhood. You made it. Black people aren't going to make it. Right. But he said it. He didn't say it to be harmful. He just said it like he was just stating facts. Like, this is well known. And I go to class and I just break down in class. I'm the only Black person in the class. And my professor goes, you need to go with those feelings. That is what's going to drive your work. Like, tap into that. So I did. So, but it evolved into the natural hair and all these things and unpacking how it worked in my family. And that's how I derived at this issue of Black sisterhood and all these things, because I did not have that experience growing up, because I was told that I thought I was better than people because of how I spoke or because I was academic. And somehow then that means that my entire race is inferior because I don't fit the stereotype. All those things just kind of play into my day-to-day life now. I'm always unpacking that. What does that mean for me and people who see me and people that think about our entire race?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So your story and mine are similar, except I had my mom, not my dad. So I did not have any connection to my Black family. So my mom being white and my dad being Black, none whatsoever. And grew up in a predominantly, white family, neighborhood schools, all of the things. And I am so fascinated by, I look back now and I think, in my high school, there were probably 4 of us between biracial and Black, and we just didn't speak to each other.
Wow.
And I remember feeling this unspoken, and I'd love to go back to them now and go, why? Like, why do you think we didn't connect? But I remember going, if I'm thinking, like, I don't know how I phrased it to myself back then, thinking, if I'm going to survive this place, if I'm going to make it, I cannot be associated. I cannot be seen with anyone else because I don't think I'll survive. Like, I really felt like it was made very clear that Blackness was not going to be acceptable here. And so I remember being the first time somebody said, Keisha, I totally think of you as white. And being like totally ripped inside, like somebody just cut me in half. And part of me was like, oh my God, like I am inherently wrong. Something's wrong with me. And the other side going, okay, I think I'm gonna, like this sort of survival thing that I didn't have anyone to process this with. Like my mom didn't understand this. And, her being a single parent was just like, you're like me. We are one and the same, because that was, her thing of needing to, as a single mom, identify with her, it's her and me against the world. Yeah, that's true. And we're actually not the same. We're not viewed as the same. So, so it's just so interesting how that plays in our growing up, and like how colorism, what we do as people of color to ourselves, the things that, people on the outside of our culture have said, and then how we, we take that in and how we pass that around to one another. Like, it's very fascinating to me. So, and I want to read all of these comments, but I'm going to try to.
Oh, that's my sister-in-law.
Oh, hey.
It's Dara.
Yeah. That's just so crazy. I mean, that reminds me of the book, what is it, Wild with Black Kids Sitting Together. So, okay, so there's so many places I want to go, but so I'm, as a K-12 educator, and you are an educator as well. So I find that educators are always funny. There's a reason that we're there, and a reason that we feel called to be there. And I find that most educators have a very interesting story as students that you would think would be this very linear, like I was the perfect student and I was, and I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. But I find that most people have some stories that are rooted in pain, and therefore feel an empathy that drives them to go, I want it to be different for the next generation, and I want to do something about it. So, like, what was your story as a student growing up?
It's the token. So, I was the one that was in the advanced classes, and, the people that weren't my cousins would call racism all the time and say, I wasn't picked for this, or, we can put you over here and be an athlete, but you can't also be an academic. So I was able to merge both of those worlds. But it was very isolating for me. So when you're speaking about, I don't see you as that, my experience was similar to that, but then I have the color issue. So where we would go to camps and we would go on trips, and they would say, oh, Amber, we can't see you. And lights would be out, and they'd say, up here. And I would smile. And then they're like, oh, we can see you now. So all those little things played into the sense of otherness and being different. Yeah. And I've always been, because of, a history of trauma and abuse and witnessing things that no one should ever witness, that I've always spoken out on what is wrong, like always. And I think I just was a parentified child. So being that my mom had issues with abuse and mental health, and I had to kind of take care of myself until she left. But I've always spoken out on those things. And I could see that play out in school, and how we would make certain groups of people feel like they didn't belong. Yeah. And from a very early, I would help out with special education. So being that I'm a school psychologist, a lot of my work was in special ed, but I would help out in those populations because they were never seen. They were invisible. And I wanted them to be fully who they were, and love them just for who they are, because they were invisible in our school. And I felt oftentimes invisible myself. So if any way that I could, make people feel like they were centered, make people feel like they were celebrated, that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, you're talking about special, you know, needs populations. I was thinking this morning, and I think being an educator gives you a unique perspective on, you get to sort of have like a bird's eye view of families, and seeing families in a way that, you know, even their own friends don't get to see. You get to see some really raw and vulnerable things. And I was thinking about, you know, working parents, working, you know, single parents with a child that's differently abled at home, excuse me, in quarantine right now. Like, I think this is hard.
Oh.
I mean, kids not getting services, kids not, I mean, oof, it's, I mean, that, I, like, my heart just goes out, and my mind, even though I haven't been in the classroom in a few years, I think about, boy, there's so much hardship going around right now. And I think, but I, you know, like you, like, feeling disenfranchised in areas of my life, especially in education, made me want to, interestingly, made me want to be in that world.
Right.
To change it. Like, you'd think that you'd be like, I'm done. This is not for me. But it was like, no, like, this is wrong, and I want to be here. So, and I
think for us, right, and who we are, and in our Black bodies and our positionality, like being in that space, and having kids that have never seen us from a position of authority, how life-changing that is, and how affirming that is to see someone that's not the janitor and custodian, because that's generally in our school system, that's where we are paraprofessionals. But you can be an educator, you can change this system. I think that's been very amazing to see. But there's also that invisible tax that comes with that too, because they always come to me. Like my kids at school, they're like, Mama Sessoms. So, you know, that's that extra burden too. But I love my kids.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm sure they love you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about the findings you did with your dissertation. So what were some of the findings? And we talked about sort of the incongruence of what people were putting out there and what you really actually believe. But like, what did you find that was the most interesting to you?
I think it was just sense of like that I thought that they were going to walk away, because my first initial thing was I want to interview Curly Nikki and Black Girl with Long Hair. They were the big ones at the time. And I remember my chair saying, you'll get an interview with them. They're going to want you to, and they just had no time for me. No time for me. Really? So I think it really worked out well that I didn't, because I wonder if I would have modified what I said had it been, if I interviewed them. So the difference between the two being Curly Nikki, more mainstream, you see her on Dr. Phil, and Black Girl Long Hair being more about that anti-racism work and speaking to our oppression, and just totally divergent views. And I remember there was this one article they put out, some white woman spoke in the space, and Black Girl Long Hair was like not having it. Like, she don't belong in this space. Like, stay out of here. This is our oppression. You can't say that you relate. You don't get it. And Curly Nikki really was trying to unpack that, because she featured different people with natural hair. So she featured a white woman with curly hair, and people were like, no, like, she does not get it.
Right.
So that was just a really interesting conversation between like, and what I even go to now is like this Black bourgeoisie, this way that we have to be, versus like, if we express our pain or talk about being how we are in these spaces, then it's like, that's not acceptable. Like, you have to assimilate to make it. So that whole narrative. So, and you can see that how successful Curly Nikki is versus Black Girl Long Hair, where she had to do things to get like clickbait, to get people to view, so she could get her money and get her revenue, versus Curly Nikki didn't have to do any of that. So it was really interesting to see that. And then also, like, I thought that people were going to take them as the expert, that they were going to say, I go to them because they know all things about natural hair. And they were like, oh no one can tell me how to do my hair. I'm the expert in myself. And they would go into these spaces and educate each other, which I just thought was such an awesome way to do this online learning community, and say, well, this is what I tried with my kid, or this is what I tried with my hair, or that didn't work for me. And the consumerism of it all was also something really fascinating. It's like, you do this whole thing of you're trying to try these products until, because you want your hair to look just like Curly Nikki. You want it to have this looser curl, so you'll try the same product she endorses, and it doesn't work for you. So then you'll be like, I had to try something else, because you are really ashamed of what your hair looks like. You haven't embraced your curl pattern and accepted it for what it is, because even in natural hair and this whole movement, there's still good hair and bad hair with our natural hair community.
Yes. So, and I've heard you talk about meeting your hair. I don't know if you're the one that made that, who made that up, but that, I mean, that.
When I did my pilot study, one of the people I interviewed, she said that. She talked about the experience of going through and cutting her relaxer out, and meeting it for the first time, and how much anxiety it had, because we were never allowed to do that as a kid. Like, we would manipulate it from, the time we got it washed, and we put it in plaits or whatever it is. So you never let it just be. So when she talked about meeting your hair, and it's just like meeting yourself and embracing yourself fully for who you are, I just remember even little when I went to my friend's house, and I don't know how old she was. She might have been 8, and she's washing her own hair. And I'm like, I don't wash my own hair. Like, you can do that? There's the culture of it all. I'm like, no, like, it is a process. I can't just do that myself. Like, we have to. So that even was just interesting when she said meeting my hair for the first time, and how we manipulate it to change it to be accepted in our society. Like, I started getting relaxers probably at 6 or 7, and remember sitting there and getting burns. I'd have burns on my head. I'd have big scabs on my head, and I would sit there and take it because you want your hair to look beautiful, so you're accepted. And when you get your hair done, we would shake it, and my one cousin would say, shake it like a white girl. And we go out and shake our hair and feel beautiful. And like, how messed up is that we're doing that to our kids?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so funny. Like, when I tell people about relaxing since 8, and I remember, my mom will say, like, if only I knew better, I would have done something different. And so I don't falter for this, but like, when you're a mixed kid in the 80s, you got your hair relaxed. There was no other option for you. And so I remember her going, I can't do this whole whatever. And and I remember feeling that, going, okay, yeah, well, if you can't and you're the adult, then I know I never will. And then going to the salon, and I remember, you're such a little kid and it burns. It's like, and I try to explain it to people who have never had a relaxer. I'm like, kerosene and a little, a match.
There you go.
And that's what it feels like for 20 minutes. And, being taught really little, like, you don't get to cry about this. Like, stop it. And then, going home, because like the pain was worth the pleasure of how you looked like a different human. And when you showed up at school the next day, I remember I'd be so excited because it was the only time I would ever feel pretty. And I remember, like, even the boys would say, like, cool hair. And I remember I'm like, I have cool hair. And I remember, you lay on your pillow, and sometimes you wake up in the morning, there's like blood or like pus or like from being, having a chemical burn, and feeling like, well, that's just normal. Like, that's just normal life. And I mean, people have no idea like how deep this goes. And so, yeah, like meeting your hair, like when I heard you say that in another interview, I was like, oh my gosh, it was like meeting yourself.
Yes.
For the first time. And it is terrifying, because what if it's not enough? Like, what if it's everything you ever feared? And I remember when I went natural, it was 5.5 years ago. I was pregnant. I didn't relax all of my pregnancy. And then at the end I was like, no, I had just given birth. And I was like, okay, I got to get my hair done, because that was a sacrifice I am not willing to do, only for my child. And I did it. And I just was like, something hit me like this. How do I say that I want to be, this crunchy mama? Like, I'm from Seattle. Like, I've always been crunchy girl. And like, which is a whole nother conversation with Blackness, veganism.
Yes.
That's like a whole nother that I'd love to talk about. But there was this, how could I say this? I want to be all natural. I want to be clean. I want to be better in, what we put in our bodies and on it. And yeah, I'm willing to put formaldehyde on my head, knowing what formaldehyde is connected, as carcinogenic. And anyways, and so that, like, just, it hit me like that. I think as a mother, it hit me like, your actions and your words are not synonymous. This just feels off. And I have this little boy that I've created who is also part Black. And what am I saying to him? And I am trying to be careful, because I'm like, if you relax your hair, do you, girl. But for me, it felt like I want to raise my little humans to love their skin and love their bodies and live in it. And then, my daughter is adopted, and so she's full Black. And that, I think that's when Dave, my husband, really was like, whoa, I gotta really pay attention here, because we're going to make many mistakes, but we do not want to make a mistake. We will, but we do not want to mistake this early. And so anyways, relaxing is such a painful, deep thing, because it's not just your hair, it's your so much of your humanity is tied into it. Like, if I don't look white, will anyone get a job? Will I be accepted? Will I be liked? So,
yeah, that's deep. It is. It's like, it's another marker of otherness, and we're always hypervigilant. We're always looking different. So there's one less thing where I have to be different and be ogled about. So if I can change that, I can blend in a little bit. But it's so problematic, and this is the message that we're telling ourselves and our kids. So like, that you're intentional about that is because you have a different experience and you weren't made to feel like you were enough. So you're being intentional about, I'm not going to do that with my kids. I tell my kids all the time, they've never had relaxers, and you're beautiful just the way you are. You're pretty brown skin, like your pretty hair. And like my 5-year-old's always going around, we have pretty brown skin, mommy. We have beautiful hair. Like and that's what I'm like, I didn't have that growing up. I was ashamed. So I definitely want to impart that in her. And my, 11-year-old has locks. And I ask her all the time, because I'm always curious because people associate dreadlocks with being dirty and all these things, but she hasn't experienced that yet. But even in my family, when we decided together, Maya and I, to make the decision, they were like, don't do that to her hair. Like, that's dirty. Because there's all these narratives that we tell ourselves. But natural hair. So I was the first in my family, but we had discussions. So when you're saying you talked about this, I sat down all the women in my family and we unpacked our hair. And it was heavy. I mean, we sat down for probably like 2.5 hours. And I remember my one aunt said, have you ever asked mom? So my grandmother who just died, she said, did you ever ask her what she thought about your hair? And I had never thought to ask her, but I asked her, I said, Mom, what do you think about my hair? And she goes, She's like, I don't like nappy hair. And she died at 95, but that was just that whole thing and being ingrained about what's good hair and what's bad hair. And because my grandmother had straight hair, Emma is accepted. Emma's hair is beautiful, but somehow that mine wasn't. But it's funny because as she got older, she stopped getting her hair pressed. And, when she died, she had natural hair. And I was like, Mom, I'm someone who didn't like natural hair. Look at you now. But it's just interesting how we grow into that and the messages we tell ourselves and how we're not, we don't belong, and how we do that within our own family. Say, well, Penny has a better curl grade than I have, and I can't do it because Amber is, her grandmother was mixed, so she must have a better curl pattern than me. All that stuff that we do to ourselves is just so problematic.
So what it is. And so what do you think, or what did you find, you said you spoke to like Black women with the, it wasn't curly Nikki, but, black girl long hair. So Black women in that community were like, no white women allowed to speak, period. And, but did you find that in curly Nikki's community as well?
There was some of that, but she spoke to it and she said, how can we ever, if we don't build a bridge, how can we ever get to the part where we're fully seen and fully respected? So I understand what her perspective was, but there are some people where there's an affinity space, and like if you're telling your story, like this is why we don't talk, because we're often silenced. We're often told, oh, you're being too sensitive. It's not like that, because everything comes from like a white male gaze. And because I'm telling my story, somehow it can't be true. So you have these affinity spaces where you need people to affirm what you're saying, because it's also like affirming your humanity.
Right.
Like, and that's the part. So when there's a person that comes in that's so dismissive of it or tries to include themselves and say, oh, I get that too. It can be very demoralizing. So I understand that you need protection, because we live in a world where we're often dismissed and silenced all the time. So it's so hard, and we need a space just for us. So I understood where they were coming from with that.
Yep. No, that makes perfect sense. Because I think you'll have then, a white woman with curly hair who has had a journey that is a different experience from the majority of white women with, if they have straight hair. And curly hair is, I wish it were as simple to care for as it's a straight hair, but it requires work. So it's, not taking away from anyone who's white that has, curly hair, whatever texture. But I can see, and I have seen before, where a white woman will comment and be like, oh, well, me too. And people are like, no, back up.
And they jump on her. Yeah.
No. It's not the same. And and so then it kind of, those conversation trains can go down that path of, like the feminist movement, where women want to say, well, that's, your experience as a Black woman, that's the same as, like all the sexism that I receive. In fact, I saw something this morning. Someone sent me a meme. This whole Karen thing is just blowing up. I mean, I was watching on the news, them people talking about Karens, and there's Instagram feeds that are just Karens, and like this definition of Karens getting big. And now like the feminists are getting really, really angry and saying, now we're picking apart women's bodies, women's voices, women's rights, women. And I'm like, oh, we have gone so far off.
Right.
And so anyways, I think, it's so hard to, I find, in my experience, I find that it's very hard to create a space that is safe for all people when you want to talk about Black issues, and you want to be safe and say, you're safe here, I see you here. And at the same time, You want other people to be there. You want white people to be there. Like, you know, like she says, like, you want there to be a bridge, and you want to allow people to be a part of a conversation, to grow and learn together. Because I think one piece of feedback I've gotten a lot in the month of June, this I call it painful, powerful June, is a lot of DMs that are like, Keisha, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'm learning. I'm listening. I'm growing. And I responded back with, well, I didn't know either. Like, I mean, I don't want people to be surprised. There's a lot I didn't know.
Yeah.
I'm learning and listening too. And so I think that people assume that if you are Black, you know everything about Blackness, everything about your history. And I'm like, no, I want to tell you that my experience has been, the more conversations I've had with Black people about this, the more often they say, I didn't know my history. You think I was taught to me? Like, the textbook companies were not written for us. So it has been, you know, if you're lucky enough to be in a family that was like, this is our history, and you're learning it in the home first, which I respect, that would be amazing, in what we're trying to do. But it didn't come for a lot of us from education. And so we know our Black experience, but in terms of our history, that not every one of us is walking around an expert. Which is why I told people, don't go to your Black friends like they're a race expert.
I know.
Stop.
Please don't.
Stop. You know, and so so like that's a whole nother topic, I guess. But do you find that the kids that you interact with, I know you're at the you're not on the side of the district that is more diverse, but do you find that as you interact with the kids of color, do you think kids today, whether it's young adults or teens, do you think they have a sense of their history? Do you think that they know?
They don't, and they talk about that. And the only reason, the kids that I work with, I'm the advisor for the African American History Club, or Heritage Club. So that is where they started unpacking. They wanted that club years ago. The students at the time, the founders, said, we need a space where we're talking about this. We need to educate people on our history because it's American history. Because they were finding that it wasn't taught. Like you're saying, the textbooks, it's not taught, and it's intentional. And in that sense of being invisible, and that I'm not seen, and it's not, you don't even see the Black joy, the Black excellence, that leaves you feeling like, when you can look at kids and you can see the racial achievement gap, the opportunity gaps, and say, well, you know, they're not making it because they're lazy, or they're this, like, because there's no books that show that we've actually built our entire cities. We had Black Wall Street, Tulsa, burned to the ground, lynched, all these things that people are now finding have been interesting. So the kids created a space for themselves, and they say, we're going to talk about our history, because they knew it was missing. And they've been empowered, because I said, if there's anything in my life that I want to leave, is that I want to embolden people enough to speak up and to name the issues that you're seeing systemically, and have it addressed. So they were empowered enough to go to the school board and say, we need to have classes that look like us, that is a reflection, and talking about the history. And they did that. And this year was the first year that they actually did a half-year course on African American history and then multicultural literature, because they were demanding it. We need to have a change. Like, enough is enough. We need to be seen, which is so powerful. So, and I know that that's the conversation that's happening now with everything that's going on. So I'm hoping that continues, because there's enough of, it's one thing to be like, okay, well, yeah, my history started with slavery. That's not the truth. So we have to get into the joy, and like to see the resilience, to see how we've made it and we thrived and survived, and not just talk about we're descendants of slaves. Like, that is so demoralizing. And especially in the setting. So I know on the other side of the district, when the kids talk, they say, there's more of them, there's more educators of color, that they will not stand for any microaggressions or anything that's said. Like, they support each other. On my side, what the kids said, when I'm the only one in the class, I'm scared to speak up, because I'm afraid no one's going to echo what I have to say. Because, and then it leaves it as, well, that it's a Black issue and the Black person has to do the work. No, like, you should be just as offended when something happens to white people. So that's where I'm trying to do that work and say, we have to echo, we have to support, still center our voices, because our voices need to be heard. And when you're centering the voices of people that are closest to the issue, you're going to get the solution. But we often don't do that. We don't bring them to the table. We don't elevate their voices. And then the people with the power make decisions that make them still comfortable. So you're not really addressing the systemic nature of it. You're just saying, we'll do these little check boxes to like throw your bone. So even though you're putting it in the textbooks, they're still feeling silenced. They're still feeling like they're not seen. And, you know, you're still feeling uncomfortable. You're not really having civil discourse. So we still have a lot of work to do, but I'm proud of the kids for standing up and saying, enough is enough. We need to do something.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. And I think it takes bravery to go,
Yeah.
you know, to as a kid to go up even against a school board of probably all white faces and to say, I'm not asking you, we need this. Like because they do need that.
Right.
That's
And white kids need that, right, too. It's not just the Black kids or the brown kids that need it. Like, white people need to understand Black excellence. They need to understand Black joy, all these things, because then it helps disrupt the narrative that we're inferior.
Yeah.
Because you can erase the whole history, then that's true, because you don't see it played out in media. You don't see it played out in books. But now people are like, oh my gosh. I had a teacher actually say to me last year, well, Amber, like, you know, after Reconstruction, he's like, you keep making slavery as an excuse, using it as an excuse. He's like, after Reconstruction, you know, there were poor white people. My family were poor and we made it. We were sharecroppers. And I said, so were Black people. I said, but here's the issue. Just because you get rid of slavery, you don't get rid of racism.
Yeah.
So he didn't understand. So I talked to him about Tulsa. I talked to him about all these things like the lynching, Jim Crow laws, all those things. And it helped open his eyes to this narrative that we're somehow making excuses.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But the fact that you didn't know that, it's just, but again, like, I'm learning my history just like everyone else. And I'm not the spokesperson, but that I'm always go back to naming it. You're saying that I'm inferior because you don't have the knowledge. Right. So I'm going to give you the knowledge so that you no longer think that way. And I didn't just make it like, I can't. Yeah. All day. I check people all day. Yes.
Absolutely. And I think you said, you know, well, two things about, you know, that everybody, white, Black, everyone needs to see that Black excellence. Like, as an educator, my biggest beef is in terms of, and my background is as a reading specialist. So literature and the literature that we are given in, you know, in school, what we give our kids to read, the only Black characters are slavery, you know, or civil rights. And guess what? I, as a kid, didn't want to read that. I was like, I'm done with that. If I have to read one more MLK book, I can't. Like, please stop reading this every February and thinking that this is it. And so if that was the only place I would ever see myself, then I could never see myself as an adventurer. I could never see myself as an astronaut. I didn't dream those dreams. I'll be so honest. I dreamt none of those dreams. I did not think of myself as an adventurous person, because I didn't think I would ever have access to it. I don't know. It just seemed like something, you know, we always joke, like in Black communities, we joke about camping. I'm like, why am I going to go camping? I am not trying to do that. Okay. That is something that we do not do. But like, I just didn't see myself as longing for adventure because I didn't read about it. And so for me, like a diverse classroom, like a literature that is diverse, and have, you know, I try to talk to educators about, you know, just get stories where the main character, it doesn't have to be on issues of race, just the main character is a kid of color. So that not only the Black kids, but the white kids are seeing that, like, kids are kids, like, and anyone can, you know, be the hero or the heroine of the story. And so even today I'm going to post, I have kind of compiled a huge list of books from 0 to 12th grade of where kids of color are the main characters. And there's a lot more these days, but I think because we can't see ourselves, you know, if we don't see ourselves as these things, how are we going to be it? So in the classroom, how do you help teachers diversify, you know, what they're talking about, or how to have safe conversations? Or do they come to you for that? Or is it everything in high school is very compartmentalized in departments, but are you seen as the resource for everyone? Or
yeah, there's a lot of that, right? So I do have, so one of my colleagues has started inviting me in. So I do team teaching with her. So 2 different colleagues. So the phys ed teacher, she has me do some lessons on intersectionality. So we talk about how our different identities intersect. So I can play Oppression Olympics all day and say I'm Black and I'm a woman, so all these strikes against me, but I also do have a lot of privilege. And so we can unpack that and talk about that. So I think that helps, because one of the issues I have to realize in my positionality as a Black woman talking about race or difference is that people automatically are like on the defensive because they think I have an agenda. So when I come in there and it's predominantly white students, I talk about their identities, and you know, we talked about this marker, this invisible marker that we are measured against, even white men. Like, there's a way that you have to be masculine. If you don't act this way, then obviously then you're gay. Like, and who created that measuring stick? So we have to talk about this invisible measuring stick, and how, when you talked about earlier, you talked about curly hair. straight hair is desired in our society. We have created a structure where we only had products that were for straight hair. So if you didn't have that, then therefore you didn't belong. Even my one friend, I bring her up, and it really gives people pause because she could not have babies naturally. Mm-hmm. She didn't have any eggs. So when she talks to her experience, and she's 40 years old and married, and like, why don't you have kids yet? And she's like, I can't. So then it makes her question her identity and her womanhood. So all these things play in. So I have those conversations with kids. And then I talk about from a level of like, there are certain barriers that, yes, some of us have that others don't. So if we have less barriers, we need to step back and help and use our power, use our privilege to make way for other people. Mm-hmm. And then I do a 3-part series in our multicultural history class on racism and anti-ethnic and anti-Blackness. And we just really talk about it. And again, like I create the space where white kids are just telling me, I feel, you didn't make me feel bad about being a white person. And that's not what it's about. Like you do have to unpack your white guilt, but I'm not trying to be like, oh, you're a white devil. Like that, there's no room for that, for growth. And I need you to understand that we have to be in this conversation together, and that is not my issue and not your issue. And I do this work also with teachers. So we do our professional development, and I train them on that. And we isolate race because it's difficult to isolate race. Yeah. We can talk about class, we can talk about, differently able people, but we can't ever talk about race, and we can't particularly talk about Blackness. So I talk about anti-Blackness, and doing that work really starts resonating with people, like using the civil rights movement as an example and saying how we've created a culture of saying, well, it was MLK and all the Black people. There were a lot of white people in that movement because they had the social capital and the power. But even if you look at the images, you'll see mostly Black people doing the marches, and that's intentional. So I know I've had educators say to me, I didn't realize I was a part of this, that I had a stake in this, and I had to do something to make it better. Because we create that narrative. So that's what I'm trying to disrupt, that narrative that it has to just be our work, because I'm tired. I've been carrying this weight, and I need you to pick up the slack. Like, I'm exhausted.
Yep. So do you think that there's a difference this time around as we're seeing this new level of civil rights? Do you think that white people are going, I have to have a stake in this game? Because I mean, I wasn't around during the civil rights, but I don't know. I mean, the literature, the Ibram X. Kendis, the Ta-Nehisi Coates of the world, may not have been so mainstream. Like, all of my white friends are reading them now, and that feels different. So what do you think, or are there any differences right now in this movement?
I think it's just one that gives me hope is that this is not just in America, it's across the globe. I can't figure out for the life of me. I'm like, why is it different this time? Like, why is it so global? And I think, COVID has left everyone at home, like there was no other distractors. So that does feel different to me, but the concern is, and as we approach school and go back in the fall, it's like, is it going to die down? So now you see, like, Breonna Taylor, all these things, the hashtags are dropping off. Because we're getting back to normal, because as long as we're making noise, you want to listen, but that gets exhausting as well. So I do have some fear that it's kind of people jumped on the bandwagon. Like, I know early on, a friend that graduated from the same program, she was really torn about posting things on social media because she didn't feel like it was making any impact. But if she didn't post, then what kind of message was that sending that she wasn't supporting? So all that back and forth and being like, but I see people that post and I'm just side eyeing them because it's like they put up their black square and they're like, or Black Lives Matter for a day, but they're not really doing the work. So I need you to come from a stage of like, I stand with you, to actually using your privilege and power to disrupt it. So I mean, up and even until last week, I'm starting to see that within my own organization with some people. And that's the work that I'm trying to do, is empowering and emboldening them to speak up. So that's not always my voice. And I did see that play out last week when because I've been challenging people to use their voice. So it's not just me. And there were white people that stood in the gap and they said, that's wrong, what just happened. And I appreciated that so much, and it gives me hope that we can continue to do that, because there's a real threat, especially when you're coming from like a position of power, that you're flexing your muscle and you're silencing Black people in the space, that you're not going to speak up, because if I say something, I'm going to lose my job. I know when I go over to admin and I talk, and my mom's like, be careful, you don't want to lose your job, but that's a real fear, and it's historical in context, because when we spoke up, we were killed. When we spoke up, we lost our jobs. But we have to get away from that. Like, me speaking up and speaking my truth is going to make everyone better. Like, we're here for all kids, not just the majority, or not just the kids that want to assimilate. So that's the work that I want to do, is like the 80% that are doing the right thing. Like, that's great. But what about the 20% that need the support?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and I think, for white people, I think, you can't just, you know, when you talk about posting a black square or like, you know, I'd see a lot of, I'll be muted from this date to this date. And I would laugh every time going, okay, like, don't mute
like you've been muted the whole time.
Like what? Yeah, I've been muted all my life. So, I mean,
Right.
I think people have got to come from a place of empathy. They've got to like, I know you cannot feel what it feels like to be me, but I need you to try to imagine it. I need you to try to think, like here, when even in this moment, when we talk about being children, you know, and somebody said, I got my hair relaxed at 4 years old. And when you hear us describe the pain, the blood, the
Yes.
sores, and the feeling, like the incredible elation that comes from shaking your hair, going, this is what it must feel like to be a human, like the dehumanization of Blackness from the youngest age, like we just need you to hear that and go, my God, I didn't know that, but now that I'm hearing that, I got to do something about it. I don't know what it is, but I got to engage. I've got to learn. I've got to listen. I've got to do something. I've got to like take action. I mean, because you can read all the books. You can audible.com. You read all the books you want, and then pretend that, you know, and be like, well, I'm more woke now. I understand Black issues. No. So, I am hopeful. I am very hopeful. And I think COVID, you're right. There's this intersection of people being home and this movement happening at this time that has done something to not just Americans, but like you're seeing it worldwide.
Yeah.
And there's
I think it was a primer too, right? It was a primer because it's like people, the buzzword was equity. Oh, people don't have access. Like you're all of a sudden realizing that poverty is a thing. And so I think that gave them a little primer. They were like, oh, so they're tuned in like, wait, there are people that are struggling.
Yeah.
And then George Floyd, now they're like, oh my gosh. Yeah. I think it kind of put people like, you can start seeing our humanity or dehumanization.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. So, I mean, I want to talk to you about all things. I want to talk about the Crown Act. I want to talk, there's so much.
Right.
This platform will only give me an hour and we're almost at it. So, so I'm going to, by the way, Crown Act is in 7 states. Is that right?
See, I know it's not here, but yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. And the Crown, for those who don't know, the Crown Act basically states that it is not lawful to discriminate people of color based off of their hair, their natural hair, which that, I mean, the Crown Act is important, but like, that's the one thing I want people to understand is we have to have laws about.
Isn't that ridiculous?
I mean, is that a microaggression in itself? I mean, it's for our freedom, but there's something about that like it sits deep, and I'm like, so you have to make laws for me to be a human?
Right. That's where my rage comes in.
God gave
That's where the rage comes. Yeah. That I have to fight for you to see my humanity. Like that makes me mad. That I have to come and I have to do this within the realms of you being comfortable. Makes me mad because I'm uncomfortable every day.
Every day.
And the privilege that you have that you can live in your comfort when we're out here being murdered and being harmed and going straight to the prison system from school, it blows my mind.
Yes.
But we've created that, you know, we live in a racist culture, like we're all inundated with it. I had to unpack it for myself and what Blackness is. And, but we have this invisible thing and we don't talk about whiteness because it's taboo for white people to talk about whiteness because we don't talk about race, but you have to. We have to have these real conversations because whiteness is the race that we're all held to the measuring stick about. And once we can get past that, I think we can make some real progress because people it's taboo to talk about it. And that's why I bring it up. In all my relationships, I bring up race all day, every day, because I'm going to normalize it for you. We're going to talk about it and it's going to have to be okay. Cause this is a real thing.
Absolutely. It's giving me a minute and 30 seconds.
Oh no. Okay.
Thank you, Instagram. Cause I had so much more. We need to talk. We need to do another one. We need to talk about, the church and Black church. That I want to talk to you about. I also want to talk to you about, I have so many questions as a biracial woman, so many things that I'm so interested in your doctoral work and what you found about biracial. But that's the next one, y'all. I'm bringing her back. But I guess I want to close. First, I want to thank you. I want people to follow you. People are asking questions. I'm going to post this. So they're asking questions. And so maybe you can go back and answer. I know people are like, wanting to work with you, connect with you. Natural_inclination. Follow her. She is a gift. She is a gift to humanity. So I really, honestly, you've been a gift to my life. So see, my husband's like, yeah,
I know.
hey girl. And then And then the last thing, I'm going to ask you something totally crazy. We've got 40 seconds. So what is one show that you are loving right now, and one show that you are like, Lord, why are people watching this?
Well, I have not watched a lot of TV, but I just finished Insecure, the final season.
Just gonna say,
but my friend has been telling me that I'm a lot like Issa Rae, but in the sense, and I said, I don't see it. And then the lady in the mirror, I'm like, that's me. I'm the one who doesn't have time for it, and I'm calling you out on your crap. I'm like, I'm the woman in the mirror. Without all the cursing.
Yep. That is so good. Oh, now it's gonna cut us off. Amber, you're amazing. Thank you.
Love you. You're awesome.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.